Hey guys, UnoPro here for my first ever monthly card review. Now 4 new cards have just come out for June and we are going to be talking about them, their place in the metagame, what role they serve, and whether these cards do have the chances to fit in some current meta decks or whether new decks will evolve. Now our first card is a 6 mana diamond golem with the golem keyword and no other text. Now when I first started planning out this video, I thought, oh no, there's a 6 mana golem, we already have one of those, and this one doesn't really look that impressive. What am I possibly going to talk about? But then I had more of a think about it, and it's quite a well designed card. Now if we add up the total stats, we see 15 points of stats. We compare this to the 8/8 golem, that's 16. So is that card strictly better? Well, no, because in general, once you get to a certain attack, health definitely becomes a lot more valuable. Another thing to note is that, the more health you have, the more effective health buffs are. Because obviously, if you give one attack to a 3/1 minion, that is going to get one more attack off. If you give one attack to a 3/10 minion, then that one attack will be relevant for, maybe one or two more attacks, maybe even more. And if we take a look at, factions that have used golem decks in the past, it's mainly been Liner and Vayner. I haven't really seen any other golem decks really played at all. So if we look at the Bloodborne spells of two of the generals in these factions, Argent definitely gives permanent attack buffs to these higher health creatures, is very, very strong, that permanent to attack. Kara also buffs up these cards in hand. By turn 6, if this starts in your opening hand, you could probably get it to a 6/13, which is very, very threatening, because that extra 2 attack is now able to be used multiple times. Okay, so it's nice to see that the devs are giving some support to these golem factions. But when we look at Bright Moss Golem, it's the same card for 5 mana, but 2 less health, a 4/9, which serves the same purpose. It has a big health body, comes out a little bit cheaper, and works well with attack buffs, and can be played early in golem decks. So if this card is, most of us will agree that it's probably worse than Bright Moss Golem, why would the devs just release a worse version of a card that's not really played in any non-golem decks? Well, the thing is, we're not comparing this card to meta cards. We're comparing it to a spot in a golem deck, where Bright Moss Golem happens to be one of the better cards. If you can get the 2/3 ramp guy out, suddenly you have a 4 mana 4/9, that can be played on turn 2. That's very, very strong. So this doesn't have to be better than Bright Moss Golem because it's going in the same deck. It's not replacing it, it's giving an extra slot. So something to keep in mind, we can't just compare cards in a vacuum. We have to look at what decks do they fit in, and do they improve any existing decks. Now golem decks aren't really competitively viable, but they are good for new players, and I believe this does improve it. Will it improve golem deck to a real deck? I highly, highly doubt it, but it definitely improves them in their current state. Now that's enough talking about a vanilla minion. Let's go on to a very interesting effect in Abdudecator. Now Abdudecator is a 3 mana 3/1 with opening gambit lower the cost of all spells in your action bar by 1. Now this is quite an interesting card, and the first thing that people look at is, well, Songhai. Songhai is known for the Spell High faction, sometimes runs some Arcana Synergy, which this card has, which is definitely very, very relevant and makes up for that 3/1 stat line a little bit. But it's quite an interesting card, and I feel like people are definitely looking at this one the wrong way a little bit. So if we just look at the body in isolation, a 3/1, we probably say it's a 1 mana worth body. But not only is that a disadvantage, is that it's just going to soak up a hit, and this card doesn't generate any other value. If it takes a hit from the general, sure, you've lost some spells, but you've literally done nothing with that card. All you've done is a tempo gain. There is just a complete loss in card advantage. I just want to take a moment to say that I was a little bit cautious of the 1-draw change, but the fact that now I can make a video and talk about card advantage in Duelist is a great thing. So back to Abdudecator. Now if you hit 2 spells, you've lowered your spells by 2, so that's saving 2 mana, and you spend a 1 mana body. That's about the 3 mana cost. Except now you have a 3/1 body, that can potentially be a waste of a card. However, if you can buff it with those Arcanist effects, then maybe that's a positive thing that you've only spent 1 mana on this body. But in general, I think you definitely need to be hitting 3 spells or more. That is when we just look in normal Arcanist decks, normal Songhai decks. And for that, I really don't think it's too viable. Just because there's so many 0 and 1 mana cards that reducing the cost by 1 doesn't really do anything. The times it's hard to play the spells are when you're reducing, Heaven's Eclipse, but reducing Heaven's Eclipse to 4 is not really the main problem, because, that means you're probably only reducing 1 or so spells, or that Heaven's Eclipse isn't really too relevant. And playing cards after the Heaven's Eclipse, which is when you'll have the most spells, and in theory is when you'll be reducing the most spells, well, normally the problem isn't playing those cards afterwards, it's having the time to take that 5 mana and play the Heaven's Eclipse. So I'm not too sure it fits into those type of decks. I'm not going to really talk too much about other Arcanist decks. You do see the occasional Vayner, Lionar, sometimes Vitruvian, but the reason I don't think those ones will really work with these cards is that they tend to lack proactive spells. Unlike Songhai, which can use those spell effects, really start pushing damage, making your minions better. The other ones are more responsive and playing these cheap spells that respond to your opponent's board. So having discounted spells doesn't really help too much with them, just because you might not have. You may be able to cast all your spells, but you might only have 1 minion to cast them on, and obviously you don't want to overkill it. What this actually does have potential in is stuff like combo decks. Now, in combo decks, it's not just about getting that most tempo. You're not trying to cast as many spells as you can in 6 turns. You're trying to kill your opponent on that 6th turn. Doesn't really matter what you do as long as you get to that point in the 6th turn. So 6 turns is just an arbitrary number, but it does serve as an example. Now, if we had a look at Old Land Fox combo with Celebrity or Inner Focusing and then buffing it, or we can look at Dagger Kiri plus Inner Focus. If you spend a turn, lowering the cost of 2 Killing Edges and a Saber Spine Seal, suddenly the next turn you have all the spurs that you might not have been able to do to the end of the game, or you might not have ever been able to do. So in a sense, it serves a similar role as Emperor Thuzian in combo decks in Hearthstone. Rather than this being a tempo card aimed to serve as like a Flash Reincarnation or Dark Fire Sacrifice for spells, where you're gaining more mana than you're spending at the cost of a card, this is reducing key cost cards that can open up some combos. Now, will this be enough to make a combo deck relevant? I'm not too sure. The metagame is very fast, and spending 3 mana on a 3/1 is never really going to be too good, but if a reliable combo deck can develop, then maybe this can see some play. So that's enough of that card. Just in summary, I don't think it's goes in any spell-based deck. I think it is more a combo-centric card rather than a tempo, because you really need to hit a ton of spells with that. So we will go on to Bastion. Now, I want to start off by saying that regardless of this card's eventual strength, if it finds a place in the metagame, it is a very exciting card, and the reason for that is it is the first structure outside of Vitruvian. So it's set a precedent that we can have more of these. Now, why is this a good thing? Well, with structures, positioning is very important. You want them to be really safe. We saw with Obelisk, actually a really good part about them is that they're more effective the closer they are, but they're a lot more vulnerable. We don't see that with this card, but the positioning of Bastion is definitely going to be very relevant in how long it can survive. Now, cards that generate continuous value can promote a slower metagame. So that is definitely something that, if more come in, we can possibly see that transition, but that's a long way away. What this card does differently from Obelisks is that its positioning does not need to be closer to your opponents to be effective. Now, when we look at Obelisk, a 0/6 is terrible at defending itself. It's pretty easy to die. But when we look at a range minion with 5 health, it's a little bit harder to deal with. Obviously, this can't fight back, which definitely makes it a lot worse. But the fact that you can just stick this in the corner, and if your opponent can't get to that corner, then every turn this value is going off. In the current state of things, I don't think this card will be too playable outside of a few maybe gimmicky decks. But if there is a position where you can take that tempo hit and you spend 3 mana doing effectively nothing that turn or giving a small health buff, then maybe this card can be okay, because it doesn't need to be safe. If your opponent doesn't have range removal or dispel, this card is quite hard to deal with if you can keep them away from it. So the best part about this card is the precedent it sets. There are more structures that can come out, more cards that don't need to be close to the action to generate value, which is the main weakness that structures have, having that 0 attack. They can't really fight in combat. So that's enough of that one. We definitely a very exciting card for the future, even if it doesn't turn out to be very good. So our last card is Ultra Rex, this month's legendary. Now, when this card was revealed, it was revealed, a week or so ago, people's reactions were a little bit polarized. Some people thought this card was really, really good, and some people thought this card was absolutely terrible, and has no place in the current meta decks. And I kind of agree with that second half, but there's a big but there. Basically, it doesn't fit into the current meta decks, but there is potential for the card, in a different type of deck than we currently see in the game, because this does open up other options. Now, if we stuck this in a normal aggro Mechma, it would probably just clunk up the hand. You want to be, playing Mechazor with a Vindicator, and then finishing your opponent basically on that turn or the turn after. Ultra Rex does not, give you finishing ability very fast at all. What it does allow is it allows a mech deck to have late game inevitability if you can get enough value off these Rexes. Now, a deck might be able to deal with one Ultra Rex and plus a Mechazor, but unlikely if a third Mechazor comes down, they're really going to be able to do a lot. It allows mech to play a value deck against really slow decks that don't have a lot of efficient answers to Mechazor. Now, we don't see a build that this really fits into at the moment. Someone may develop one, but it allows a lower amount of mechs because you have more late game. There's no need to rush out the mech, and it allows you to avoid these situations where, say you're a mech deck and your opponent's at 20 health. Now, let's say they're a liner, because there's potential for them to even heal back up further. If you just play Vindicator and Mechazor rush your opponent, if you're low on resources and they're able to deal with that Mechazor, suddenly, they're at 12 health, but your biggest threat is gone. Your deck's now filled with these understated, low-cost minions that don't really impact the board that much. By committing to that Mechazor, you basically, lost your win condition if you ain't able to, just finish them off after that. What Ultra Rex can do is, you can say, instead of, using a Vindicator, I can use Ultra Rex. And that is better for when your opponent's at high health and Mechazor won't be able to finish out the game. So, it does give options against very late game decks to repeatedly generate this massive threat. It is very slow, but, the first Mechazor you can definitely get in your hand pretty easily. Ultra Rex on turn 7, play a mech plus Ultra Rex, that's a guaranteed one. Getting another Mechazor after that is definitely a lot harder, because there's no real way to play Ultra Rex and another Mechazor in the same turn. But definitely something that's not the most game-breaking thing. Ultra Rex can just serve similar to Shadow Dancer, draw out some removal, need range removal or dispel, or you will get even more value. So I don't think this card is amazing. I don't think it's going to break mech decks, but I am excited in that it does open up new possibilities for mech decks that can move away from simply playing a bunch of minions, getting out Mechazor as fast as you can and rushing it into your opponent's face for hopefully lethal, or you might lose the game if your opponent can deal with it and stabilize. So it offers late game options and could even see play in decks as a tech option against heavy control. We will have to see how the strength of the card goes. I don't want to make too many comments about the strength, just because it's a very polarizing card. It's very unclear just how good this card can be, but the ability to get a Mechazor in hand is very, very strong. A lot of the times, opponent is saving one removal all game for Mechazor. Suddenly, if you have the time to play another one, that could just simply be game over. Anyway, guys, that's enough. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these cards, and I think they definitely even if they're not the most powerful cards, they're definitely a step in the right direction. We've seen through Diamond Golem that the devs are happy to support more niche decks that are aimed at beginners and give them more options. Through Abdul Decatur, we see combo decks. There's potential there, and I don't think these devs just are designing cards with no reason in mind. Obviously, there's spell high potential, Arcanist potential, as well as combo decks that we haven't really seen. They've fallen out after the Magmar combo got nerfed pretty heavily, as well as old Lantfox. So that's definitely something hopeful for the future, because combo decks can be a healthy part of a metagame. Bastion is an amazingly exciting card because it shows us that structures can come to duelists. We will probably see more. They could slow down the metagame and give players who want to generate consistent value really good options. And the precedent that it doesn't need to be close to the action to get its effect off is very, very strong, and definitely will help the viability of future structures. And Ultra Rex, potential for slower mech decks, definitely something more interesting than simply just rushing your opponent down. So make sure you leave your comments in below. If you want to see any more of these Let's Talk Duelist videos, make sure you leave your ideas. I'm definitely got a lot more planned. If you want to see more gameplay videos as well, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.